I'm here with David Wu, who is a member of PwC's National Executive Board in China. David, great to have you with me.
Thank you.
I would like to speak to you about what's going on in China. You have a lot of views. Before I start, I don't know if you ever saw the film The Untouchables, but it's about a mythical story where you've got Kevin Costner playing Elliot Ness chasing down Al Capone. And the reason I raise it is because one of the heroes in the film is an accountant who actually is the man responsible for bringing down Al Capone. So the question I guess I'm going to ask you is, you are an accountant rather than an economist, and you probably wondered where this was leading. So what's the role that the accountants can play in China? Can they play some sort of comparably heroic role, maybe not saving us from the bad guys, but having a constructive role to play in China's reconstruction and development?
That's a very good question to start with. In China, not like in other countries, there are not many forces that's actually helping the society to strengthen the governance and also verify the quality of the financial statements. So accountants or the auditors are the only profession that's chartered to do that job. So through the the work or the professional work that was carried out to verify the accounting information, that will be helping the society to have more reliable information. And in that respect, the quality of financial information will help develop the capital market. And I think that is as important and as heroic as you say.
It can be somewhat risky and challenging, and I think back, for example, to the situation we had a couple of years ago where there was a number of Chinese firms that went public on the American stock exchanges. It turned out that a number of them had faulty accounting. There were scams in many instances. And I think the accountancy profession itself took a lot of heat for those. I mean, were you involved in any of that? Not in the sense of being involved in the scams, but were you touched at all by that problem?
I was not involved at all in this period, in auditing those companies. Actually, I think there are a couple of things to reflect on that. First is that the regulatory cooperation between, say, United States and China was not that close as it should be, because actually, Marshall, when all those companies that was taken over by some U.S. companies to listed in the United States called reverse takeover, and those companies do not get proper supervision and approval from the Chinese regulators. And of course, the U.S. regulators have to rely on the integrity of those companies' management itself, but it's so far away, and the governance procedures of those companies are not well established, and certainly that doesn't work out well. So that's one thing to reflect. That requires better regulatory cooperation.
And in fairness, China is not unique to accounting scams. We've had our share of them in the United States as well. So it wasn't meant to cast any aspersion on China or your profession in particular in China.
Thank you.
But it's an interesting area because, again, there has been a lot of talk about corruption, not just here in the United States, but also in China. And in many senses, you are at the cliff face in regard to how you deal with that, because clearly if you find something wrong with the accounts, then sometimes it leads to a more problematic area. Mm-hmm. Do you get the sense that this is an issue that is being taken seriously by the authorities, and are they addressing the corruption problem? I mean, there's been talk about it, but sometimes it's said that it can only go so far before it's stopped again. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think corruption, Marshall, we face the corruptions, but in this case, I think I need to differentiate from the accounting corruptions, which is falsified accounts, and the corruptions that's going on in the society. Mm-hmm. And for the accounting, corruption, which is falsified accounts, I think those companies which have done that will receive the capital market punishment, and that the period will be short and will be revealed and punished very quickly. I think more important to address is the corruption that's going on in, or brought together with the market reform, where we don't have a good political system and don't have a good transparency to stop those people who have the power and to take advantage of those power to benefit their own purpose. And that is a challenge. And I believe the government has actually taken serious measures, especially the new government under President Xi Jinping. They are really serious about, campaign those anti-corruption measures. And more important, actually, those corrupted officers actually are becoming an institutionalized group to protect their own interests, and they become an obstacle for reform. I think we need to use the anti-corruption campaign as a leverage point to actually embark the reform. So all the corruptions can be better handled. Meanwhile, we carry out our reform procedures.
Now, let's go from the micro. We've been looking a little bit at your profession and the issue of corruption. Let's go to the broader macro picture with regard to China. It's been in the news a lot recently. There has been some indications of slowdown. It's not clear as to whether this is a slowdown which is symptomatic of a broader secular trend, or if this is just a cyclical blip, and if China's going to go back to the 10-12% growth that we saw a few years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Growth rate above 8, to say 10-12% for a large country like China is a miracle. And I think some adjustments of this growth rate to say 6-7% are actually very acceptable. And that's actually also a reasonable range. I think when we talk about China's economic growth, our new government has mentioned that we will chart our road to a China dream. And I think, Marshall, we have two important dates to remember. One is 2021, and one is in 2049.
And 2021 is the anniversary of the founding of the modern-day Chinese Republic, if I'm not mistaken.
No, 2021 is the founding of 100th anniversary of the Communist Party.
Okay,
yeah.
Yes.
And the second
2049 is the founding of the 100th anniversary for the country.
Yeah, for this, what we call 2 100 years goal, which you pointed out is very, very right. And for the first part, basically Xi Jinping's President Xi Jinping's term as a leader will ending. And he is a very visionary leader. And in this coming several years, I think he'll chart a very important reform and help China to strengthen its economy and development up to 2021. And at that time, what they call is a prosperous middle-class society will be established. And that, I think, through this process, we will advance. The second is, of course, leading to 2049, and that is about 35 years from now. And if the reform plan carries out well, in particular to establish a good political system to move forward, then I think China will have a much stronger economy, and that is very important.
And the political system, as you say, the question of political reform is closely tied to the economic reform. It's argued that the Communist Party's legitimacy has long rested not on its democratic foundations, but on the ability to establish growth and prosperity for the Chinese people. So clearly, if it fails in that mission, or there is a slowdown in the growth and there are economic problems, it calls into question the party's political legitimacy, which is probably problematic as you get it to 2049.
That's a very good aspect. The Communist Party itself has to realize that its mission and its purpose is to work for the country and work for the nation, work for the people, not for their own interests. Therefore, I think the next reform will have to come back to the reform of the party system itself to enhance transparency and to enhance disciplinary actions, to monitor and supervise their own behavior. And one of the economic driver, Marshall, for China for the next 35 years is, of course, the urbanization. And the urbanization itself, requires, in my view, two major reforms. First is actually grant the land to the peasants, because at this moment China still maintain what we call two-segment society. Basically, the people who were born in the village are not allowed to move into the cities, and they were just grounded in that village. And in particular, they when they die, their siblings cannot inherit the piece of land. So their economic interests were all taken away by this communist system. And in order to move on for urbanization, I think first we need to grant these farmers the property titles. And then second is to establish a system where all the citizens are equal, so that people from the village also can entitled to have the life as they are enjoying in the cities.
How extensively do those restrictions apply? Because my understanding is that much of the growth of China over the last 15, 20 years has been driven by this migration from the countryside into the city. But you're suggesting there are restrictions as to how far that can actually go.
Even the last say 10 years, the growth is driven by the migration workers. But the migration workers in the cities still do not enjoy equal and full citizenship as those people who have the city residence permits. So in that sense, those people and at least those migrant workers doesn't have the security as comparing to those citizens living in the city. So the consumption desire and the safety they just don't have. So we need to entitle these citizens, migrant workers, with full citizenship rights, e.g. they can get access to pension, same and equal housing, same and equal schooling for their children, and hospital facilities. If that comes, I think the consumption part of China's economy will grow, and will grow with quality, and that would be a driver for China's economic development.
And you've touched on something which I think many people have focused on over the last few years, which is to say that China's growth has been largely investment-driven. Capital expenditure as a percentage of GDP is over 50%, which is historically unprecedented. And Japan, by way of contrast, during its bubble years, capex as a percentage of GDP, I think, got up to about 24%, and that was considered unbelievable. I think in the US it's more like 17, 18%. And China, it's over 50%. So the question is, can you manage to reorient the economy more towards a consumption base without causing this huge disruption actually in the economy, so and causing a great slowdown?
One great question, and Marshall, even our capex, portion as GDP is high, but still, we have to bear in mind that China is a very, very poor country, and it's a very large country. It has come out from an economy where not so much capital investment has been done. So even at this stage with the migration process, we still need a lot of investments in infrastructures. So I think investment will still be a very important driver for the economy. And in particular, these investments, if we're taking good advantage of the technology side, this will enhance the productivity and efficiencies for the society. I think that's very necessary. So I actually believe that the investments in railways, investments in enhancing the environmental world in China will be an important driver for the next development. So it's true for consumption. As I said, we want the farmers in particular. We have about half of our population is still relegated as the second-class citizen, in the village. If they can upgrade their life conditions with a security in the sense that they were treated equally, and then the China's economy will still will really come in with a good driver. That's consumption.
And it's not, to go back to the investment point that you were making earlier, that you still need the considerable amount of investment to drive up China's living standards. There is also the issue of debt. The growth in debt, particularly private debt, over the last few years in China has been historically unprecedented. And this has caused great concern that it will create another form of systemic instability within the economy. I mean, I wonder what your thoughts were on that, actually.
You are actually very, very knowledgeable about China. I thought just coming here for talking about accounting. Now you talk about the debt. I think, just to take it back, the Chinese economy does borrow significantly, in particular, last 5 years, after the stimulus package. To get out of the economic crisis, global financial crisis, and
China played a very constructive role there because they did actually introduce quite a significant fiscal stimulus after 2008. So.
Yes, together with that, coming 4 trillion that may be stimulus package. Together with that, there's an 8 trillion that may be loans to governments and government financing vehicles, and I think it seems to be very high. But bear in mind, when we talk about this debt level, we never really take into account of the assets that the government have. Basically, the Chinese government have access to the large ownership of the state-owned enterprises, large reserves of lands, and those assets in their hands can be liquidated to match the debts. So I think what we see is just one part of the balance sheet of the government, which is the debt side. What we didn't see is the asset side. So at this moment, the Chinese government is taking stock of the assets as well as the liabilities, and then readjust our fiscal policies and see where we can move from there.
So there is hope. We're not likely to see the economy blow up. It will withstand the challenges that it faces over the next 20 years, in your opinion?
There are actually lots and lots of challenges. You mentioned about political stability. We mentioned about the debt levels. We mentioned about the social elements of the feeling of unequal, unjustice society. With all those challenges ahead, I think the government is charged with a mission, basically to understand what is the real needs of the people. And I think we should allow the government to do some housekeeping work and then to move on.
Well, hopefully they will consider that your wise counsel, and the country will continue to surprise us with positive developments. David Wu, thanks very much for joining me this afternoon. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you for your friendship. Thank you.